In the Bitterroot Mountains, a retired Navy SEAL lived where the snow could bury almost anything. Silas Harrow thought the forest was the only place quiet enough to hide his old war. Then, one freezing evening, a soaked German shepherd puppy came out of the trees and pulled at his pant leg. It did not know his name, his pain, or the ghosts he carried. It only knew another puppy was trapped, and somewhere beyond the black pines, their mother was still waiting. Before the blizzard ended, one small dog would run back toward the lights and change Silas forever. If this story touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from, leave your thoughts below, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers. The Bitterroot Mountains did not rise from the earth so much as brood above it. In winter, their ridges wore snow like old kings wore silence, heavy, white, and absolute. Pines stood black against the slopes, their branches bowed beneath frost, and the frozen creek below Silas Harrow's cabin shone faintly beneath its crust of ice, like a blade someone had buried and forgotten. Silas had lived there for 4 years. The cabin sat beyond the last maintained road, tucked among lodgepole pines and wind-bent firs, with a tin roof, a stack of split wood, and one narrow porch that faced the western ridge. It was not much of a home. It had no framed photographs on the walls, no soft rug by the stove, no guest chair that had ever been used by a guest. But it held heat when the fire was fed, and it did not ask questions. For Silas, that counted as kindness. At 52, he still carried the frame of a man built by discipline. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and hard through the arms and chest, though age had taken away the sharp vanity of youth and left something more weathered in its place. His dark brown hair had grown longer than Navy regulations would have tolerated, falling in rough, controlled waves beneath his wool cap. A day or two of stubble shadowed his jaw. On his right arm, half hidden beneath the sleeve of his olive combat shirt, an old Navy SEAL tattoo had faded slightly, as if even ink could grow tired of remembering. He worked trail maintenance for Bitterroot Hollow Lodge, a small ski resort that survived on winter tourists, avalanche training weekends, and the stubborn hope that every season would be kinder than the last. Silas cleared fallen branches, checked marker poles, repaired warning signs, maintained old snowshoe paths, and made sure visitors did not wander from mapped trails into the kind of wilderness that did not forgive enthusiasm. It was good work for a man who did not want much company. Snow did not ask where he had served, pine trees did not ask how many men had come home, and the wind, cruel as it could be, never said, "You should have done more." That morning, the weather radio on his table hissed with static before a woman's voice pushed through. Winter storm warning remains in effect for the Bitterroot Range. Heavy snowfall expected by late afternoon, with whiteout conditions possible overnight. Travel may become hazardous or impossible. Silas stood by the stove, one hand around a chipped enamel mug, listening without expression. The coffee had gone lukewarm. Outside, the sky was the color of old pewter, and the air had that strange, waiting stillness that came before a mountain storm. It felt as though the whole range had drawn in a breath and was deciding whom to keep. He set the mug down, pulled on his field jacket, and checked his gear by habit. Radio, knife, headlamp, emergency blanket, rope, compact shovel, first aid kit, compass. The compass was old, military issue, with a scratched brass case and a worn cord. It had belonged to Calder once. Silas did not need it to find his way through these woods. He knew the trails, the creek bends, the broken fence line near the North Ridge. But he carried it anyway. Some men carried medals. Silas carried the weight of a promise no one had asked him to keep. He was stepping onto the porch when the distant whine of a snowmobile tore across the morning. His body reacted before his mind did. The mug on the table inside, diesel in hot air, dust in his mouth, a voice shouting over comms, the ground bucking. someone calling his name from under broken stone. Silas's hand closed hard around the porch rail. The mountains vanished for 3 seconds. Then came back snow, cabin, Montana, not there, here. He released the rail slowly. His breath came in through his nose, out through his mouth. He named what he could see, because naming things helped nail the world back into place. Porch, axe, woodpile, ridge, snow. The snowmobile whine faded somewhere toward the lodge. Silas straightened, adjusted the collar of his Navy field jacket, and stepped off the porch as if nothing had happened. There was no audience anyway. The pines were loyal witnesses. They never applauded. They never pitied. By mid-morning, he reached the maintenance shed behind Bitterroot Hollow Lodge. The resort sat in a shallow bowl between slopes, its main building built to look older than it was, with timber beams, wide windows, and stone fireplaces meant to convince wealthy guests they had purchased a piece of frontier hardship without the inconvenience of true discomfort. Denny Holcomb was waiting near the Snowcat garage. Denny was 48, clean-shaven, and dressed in a black resort jacket that looked too new for the weather. The Bitterroot Hollow logo was stitched neatly over his chest. His gloves were leather, his boots spotless, and his smile belonged to a brochure that had never been caught in a storm. "Silas," Denny called, lifting one hand, "before you head out." Silas stopped beside the trail map board. "Storm's moving faster." "So I hear." Denny glanced toward the sky, then back to Silas. "I need you to check the old trap markers along Bitter Creek and the warning signs near the north boundary. Guests have been asking about backcountry access." "They shouldn't be. That is why we have signs." Denny's smile sharpened slightly. "And why we have you." Silas said nothing. Denny stepped closer, lowering his voice in the way men did when they wanted a threat to sound like business. "Stay south of the partner property. The training area is active, and I don't want confusion." Silas looked toward the northern timber line. Beyond it lay a leased parcel attached to an old breeding facility the lodge had recently begun calling its Winter Rescue Dog Training Partner. There were glossy posters in the lobby now, German shepherds in red vests, smiling volunteers, phrases like avalanche readiness and rural emergency response. Denny had spoken about it at town meetings as if the lodge had personally invented compassion. "Trail line crosses near the creek," Silas said. "Your trail is your trail," Denny replied. "The rest isn't your concern." The words were polite. The edge beneath them was not. Silas studied him for a moment. Denny had the look of a man doing math behind his eyes. Every tree was liability. Every employee was cost. Every living thing, sooner or later, became inventory. "I'll check the signs," Silas said. "Good." Denny's smile returned. "And Silas, with this storm coming, let's avoid heroics." That almost made Silas laugh, not because it was funny exactly, more because men like Denny often mistook isolation for recklessness. Silas had survived this long by avoiding heroics. Heroics got men boxed, folded, flagged, and shipped home to people who had to learn how to breathe around an empty chair. He turned away without answering. The trail into the north woods narrowed quickly. Lodge noise faded behind him. The clank of ski racks, the laughter of guests, the low mechanical growl of machines grooming snow. Soon there was only the crunch of his boots, the whisper of falling flakes, and the creek speaking beneath its skin of ice. Silas moved with steady economy. He replaced one cracked warning marker, tightened wire around another, and cleared snow from a sign half buried near a bend in the trail. Danger, unmarked terrain beyond this point. He brushed the words clean with one gloved hand. The creek curved below a shelf of rock, black water visible in narrow seams where the ice had not sealed completely. Old trap cages, long disabled, sat half swallowed by snow along the bank, relics from another season, another management plan, Another good idea abandoned when money changed direction. Silas checked them because trapped metal could still injure wildlife, and because neglected things had a way of becoming somebody else's emergency. By early afternoon, the wind changed. It came down the slope in long, testing breaths, lifting loose snow from the ground and combing it through the trees. The sky thickened. The pines began to creak. Silas turned back. He had made it perhaps half a mile along the creek when he heard the sound. At first, he mistook it for a branch-scraping stone. A thin cry. Then nothing. He stopped. The forest held still around him. Again, small, broken, almost swallowed by the wind. Silas turned slowly, scanning the creek bank, the brush, the low rock shelf near the bend. He saw only snow, pine trunks, dead grass trembling through the crust. Then something burst from under a tangle of winter-browned fern. A puppy. It stumbled into the open, all legs and wet fur, a German shepherd mix no more than a few months old. Its coat was yellow and black beneath the mud and melted snow, with a dark little saddle across its back and a honey-colored chest. One ear stood straight up, the other tilted sideways, giving it an expression so grave and ridiculous that, in another life, Silas might have smiled. But the pup was shaking too hard for humor. Its muzzle was crusted with ice. Its paws punched clumsily into the snow. A pale streak of fur marked its left shoulder like a crooked spark. It stared at Silas. He stared back. "Where'd you come from?" he murmured. The puppy did not bark. It rushed forward, caught the fabric of Silas's pant leg in its teeth, and tugged once. Not hard, not with understanding. Just desperate. Silas looked past it into the trees. No. The pup released him, backed away several steps, then turned toward the rock shelf. It looked over its shoulder. Silas remained still. The puppy came back and tugged again. A small, frantic pull. A plea written in teeth and trembling bones. Silas felt something old shift in him. Not memory this time, not the battlefield. Something older than grief, older than training. The instinct that had once made him cross open ground for a man who was calling for help. He crouched slowly. The puppy flinched, but did not run. "You don't know me," Silas said quietly. "That's probably wise." The pup's lifted ear twitched. The crooked one trembled. Then it turned again toward the rocks and gave a thin, urgent whine. Silas understood enough. Not that the animal had chosen him as a rescuer, not that it knew what mercy was. It was a frightened young creature, half frozen and familiar enough with human hands to risk approaching one. Somewhere behind it was another sound, another body. Another heartbeat losing ground to the cold. He rose. "All right," he said. "Lead." The puppy moved in bursts, slipping, pausing, glancing back to make sure the large, slow human was still following. At one point it vanished behind a fallen limb and popped out again with snow on its nose, looking offended that the mountain had dared inconvenience it. Despite himself, Silas let out one breath that almost became a laugh. The sound startled him. He could not remember the last time a laugh had escaped without permission. The pup led him down toward the creek bend, where the bank dipped under a low shelf of stone. A broken pine branch lay wedged across a narrow hollow, half covered by snow. Beneath it, something moved. A second puppy lay curled in the shadow, smaller than the first, yellow-faced, black-backed, with a dark mark running down its forehead like a tiny exclamation point. Its rear leg was pinned beneath the heavy branch. Its breathing came in shallow, weak shivers, and each sound it made seemed too fragile to survive the wind. The first puppy rushed to it. Then, suddenly, it spun and planted itself between Silas and the trapped pup. Its lips lifted. A growl came out, thin, childish, brave beyond reason. Silas froze. There it was, the whole heartbreaking kingdom of loyalty, packed into a shivering body barely taller than his boot. The pup had brought him here, and now it stood ready to fight him for coming too close. "Fair enough," Silas whispered. He lowered himself slowly to one knee in the snow. The cold came up through his pants at once. He barely felt it. His eyes stayed on the guarding pup, not the trapped one. In the old world, in the world of doors and alleys and broken walls, you never moved toward the wounded without respecting the one still standing watch. He pulled off one glove with his teeth and held out his bare hand, palm down, fingers loose. The puppy growled again. Silas did not move. "My name's Silas," he said, voice low. "Not that you asked." The wind moved through the pines above them. Snow dusted his shoulders, the brim of his cap, the old SEAL tattoo hidden beneath layers of cloth. Somewhere far behind him, the lodge existed with its warm windows and polished floors, and men like Denny counting what everything was worth. Here, beneath the rock, worth had become simpler. One small life pinned under wood, one small life standing guard, one man kneeling between a storm and a choice. The guarding pup took one uncertain step closer. It stretched its nose toward Silas's hand and sniffed. Its whole body quivered with distrust. Silas waited. The pup's eyes were dark and bright and terrified. Then, from beneath the branch, the trapped puppy whimpered again. The guardian turned its head, and the spell broke. It pressed back against its companion, licking the smaller pup's ear, then swung its gaze to Silas as if demanding he hurry and warning him not to try anything stupid at the same time. "Understood," Silas said. He reached very slowly for the branch, testing its weight. It was heavier than it looked, wedged between stone and frozen ground. Moving it too fast could hurt the trapped leg. He shifted his pack off one shoulder and took out his folding saw. The metal clicked open. The sound snapped through the hollow. Silas's vision flashed white. Not snow, dust, sparks, metal. A door blown inward. Someone shouting, "Harrow, move!" His hand tightened around the saw until his knuckles ached. A wet nose touched his wrist. Silas looked down. The guarding pup stood close now, trembling, its crooked ear angled toward him. It had not forgiven him. It had not trusted him. But it had touched him anyway, because the smaller pup had whimpered and time was running out. Silas drew one breath, then another. "And snow," he said under his breath. "Rock, saw, puppy, creek." The world returned by inches. He set the saw teeth against the branch and began to cut. Carefully, slowly, not like a soldier breaching a door, like a man asking permission from a frightened world. The trapped puppy's cries softened when Silas wedged one gloved hand beneath the branch to take pressure off the leg. The guardian pup hovered inches away, growling whenever Silas moved too quickly, then licking the smaller one's face as if embarrassed by its own tenderness. "Bossy little thing," Silas muttered. The pup sneezed snow onto his sleeve. "Yeah," he said. "That's about right." The branch finally shifted. Silas eased it up just enough to slide his other arm beneath the trapped puppy's body. The small animal was shockingly light. Too light. Its fur was cold through his sleeve, its heartbeat fluttering like something caught in a paper bag. The guardian pup lunged forward with a warning bark. Silas stopped. "I know," he said. "I know." He held the injured puppy close but low, letting the guardian see, smell, decide. The pup sniffed its companion's face, then Silas's sleeve, then gave a small, miserable whine that sounded almost like surrender. Not trust, not yet. But enough. Silas tucked the injured puppy inside his open jacket, against the warmth of his chest. The tiny body shuddered. The guardian pup stared, horrified by the arrangement, and yet unable to deny the heat of it. "You too," Silas said. The pup backed away. Silas waited. A gust of wind drove snow through the trees, erasing the tracks they had made only minutes before. The storm was no longer approaching like a rumor. It was arriving. The puppy looked toward the woods, then toward the bundle inside Silas's jacket. At last it stepped forward. Silas opened his coat wider, and the guardian pup allowed itself to be lifted, stiff as a plank and twice as offended, its paws pressed against his ribs, its wet fur soaked into his shirt. It smelled of mud, fear, and cold pine. Silas stood with both puppies held against him. For a moment he did not move. Long ago, beneath another sky, he had carried men heavier than himself through noise and dust and heat. He had carried guilt even heavier. But this weight was different, smaller, warmer, still alive. The injured puppy gave one faint sigh against his chest. The guardian pup, wedged under his arm, kept its head turned outward, watching the trees. Still on duty. Silas looked down at it. "You're a foolish little soldier," he said. The pup blinked once, snow clinging to its whiskers. Silas adjusted his grip, turned toward the trail, and began the long walk back through the rising storm. Behind him, the creek whispered under ice. Ahead of him, the lodge waited with its rules, its boundaries, and its clean-handed men. Above him, the Bitterroot sky lowered like a closing gate. Silas did not know where the puppies had come from. He did not know whose tag might be hidden beneath their wet fur, or why one had been strong enough to seek help while the other had been left beneath a branch. He only knew that the forest had placed two small lives in his arms, and for the first time in years his old promise had a shape he could hold. "Do not leave them. Not this time." He lowered his head against the wind and kept walking. By the time Silas Harrow reached the maintenance shed, the storm had begun to test the windows. Not fully. Not yet. The real blizzard was still gathering itself beyond the high ridges, dragging snow out of the dark western sky like a white cloak being pulled across the shoulders of some old mountain god. But the first hard gusts had arrived. They scraped loose ice across the yard and rattled the tin roof above the shed, making the whole place sound as if it were muttering warnings in a language only winter understood. Silas shouldered the door open with his hip. Both puppies were still inside his jacket. The injured one, Milo, lay against his chest with a heat so faint it frightened him. Bracken, wedged beneath Silas's other arm, had stopped struggling, but only because exhaustion had finally done what trust could not. One ear stood straight up. The other leaned sideways in stubborn suspicion. Even half-frozen and soaked, he kept his head turned outward, watching the room as if every shovel, fuel can, and coil of rope might be planning something dishonorable. "You can stand down, Sergeant," Silas murmured. Bracken answered with a weak huff. The maintenance shed was rough but warm enough once Silas kicked the door shut and lit the propane heater. The room smelled of old sawdust, machine oil, damp wool, and metal tools. On one wall hung trail signs waiting for repair. On another, snowshoes, axes, rope, orange boundary flags, and a calendar from 3 winters ago. There was a narrow workbench beneath the window and an old army cot in the corner where Silas sometimes rested during the long maintenance days. He laid Milo on the cot over his folded jacket and tucked an emergency blanket around the pup's small body. Milo barely moved. His right rear leg trembled when Silas touched near the hip, but there was no sharp angle, no obvious break. That was something. Not enough, but something. Bracken jumped up beside him at once, or tried to. His front paws hit the cot, his back legs failed. He slid down in an offended heap. Silas stared at him. Bracken stared back, shivering with outrage. "All right," Silas said. "Dignity preserved." He lifted Bracken onto the cot. The pup immediately planted himself between Silas and Milo. Though his legs were shaking so hard, his whole body buzzed like a badly tuned engine. A clump of frozen fern still clung to his shoulder. That was what had given Silas the name on the walkback, Bracken, after the winter brown ferns tangled along the creek bed. Milo's name had come differently. It had slipped out when the injured pup gave that soft, sad breath against Silas's chest, a tiny sound that seemed too gentle for a mountain storm. Milo. A small name. A warm name. A name that did not belong beneath a fallen branch. Silas found 2 towels in a cabinet and warmed them near the heater. He worked slowly, careful not to crowd them. He had handled injured men in bad places, had tied bandages in the dark, had lifted bodies through dust and noise, and instructions barked over radios. But puppies were a different kind of battlefield. Smaller, quieter, less forgiving somehow, because there was no strategy to hide behind. He dried Bracken first. Bracken disliked this on principle. He growled once when Silas touched his paws, sneezed when a towel brushed his nose, and attempted to bite the corner of the emergency blanket as if it were personally responsible for the state of the world. His courage was absurd. His body was too thin. His left shoulder carried a pale streak of fur like a crooked bolt of lightning, visible now that the mud was coming away. "You're going to be trouble," Silas said. Bracken blinked at him, solemn and damp. Milo was worse off. His fur had chilled close to the skin, and his breathing came in uneven little pulls. Silas wrapped him in the warm towel, then another layer of emergency blanket, leaving the sore leg supported but untouched. Milo opened his eyes once. Brown, soft, confused. There was a narrow dark streak down the middle of his forehead, like a tiny exclamation point drawn by a worried hand. Silas felt something tighten in his chest. Not panic, something older and more dangerous. Attachment. He reached for the radio mounted above the workbench. Static answered first, then lodge chatter. A groomer operator complaining about visibility, someone laughing. A guest services voice asking if the hot cider urn had been refilled. Silas pressed the talk button. "Maintenance to front desk. I need the number for Dr. Larkin's clinic." A pause. Then, "Silas, everything okay?" "No, I found 2 pups near Bitter Creek, 1 injured. I'm taking them down." Another pause. Longer this time. Before the front desk could answer, the shed door opened behind him. Cold wind shouldered its way inside. Denny Holcomb stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 Snow Patrol employees in red lodge jackets. Snow dusted the shoulders of Denny's black resort coat, but somehow had not ruined the polished shape of him. His hair remained neat beneath his hat. His gloves looked expensive and unused. His eyes went straight to the cot, not to Milo's trembling leg, not to Bracken's shaking body, to the puppies themselves, as if counting them. "Where did you get those?" Denny asked. The tone was wrong. That was the first thing Silas noticed. Not surprise, not concern, not even irritation. Recognition, quickly buried. Silas stepped between Denny and the cot, without thinking. "Near the creek." Denny's jaw tightened. "Which part of the creek?" "North Bend." One of the patrol employees shifted, glancing at Denny. He was young, with frost in his eyebrows and the nervous posture of a man wishing he had been assigned to salt the steps instead. Denny took 1 step into the shed. "That's restricted boundary." "It's a trail line," Silas said. "Old trap markers are on the lodge checklist." "You were told to stay south of the partner parcel." "I stayed on the trail." "You brought unverified animals across resort property." Denny's voice sharpened, but did not rise. He was too practiced for shouting. "Do you understand what kind of exposure that creates? Health concerns, liability, interference with an active training program." Bracken growled. It was not impressive in volume, but it carried conviction. The puppy dragged himself closer to Milo and raised his uneven ears, 1 heroic, 1 foolish. The younger patrol employee looked down and, despite the tension, almost smiled. Denny did not. Silas kept his voice level. They were freezing. "Then animal control should handle it." "I'm taking them to a vet." You are not taking unknown dogs off this property after finding them beside a restricted area." Silas looked at him then, really looked. Denny's face held the smooth concern of a man used to speaking in front of donors. But beneath it was calculation, fast and bright. He was already arranging the event into safer words. Unknown animals, restricted boundary, employee misconduct, policy violation. There were men who pointed weapons. There were men who pointed paperwork. Silas had learned not to underestimate either. "If you want to call the sheriff," Silas said, "call him from the road. I'm leaving now." Denny's smile vanished. "I can terminate your maintenance contract today." The shed seemed to grow quieter. For any other employee, that might have been a threat measured in money. For Silas, it reached deeper. The contract paid little, but it bought solitude. It gave him legal reason to move through the forest before dawn, to cut branches from buried trails, to disappear among trees, without having to explain why rooms full of people felt smaller than foxholes. Denny knew that. Maybe not all of it. Enough. "You'd also lose access to lodge land," Denny continued. "All of it. I would hate for a misunderstanding to make your life harder up here." Behind Silas, Milo whimpered. Small, thin. Not a sound a misunderstanding made. Silas picked up his jacket from the cot and wrapped Milo more securely. Bracken tried to stand and failed, then bared his tiny teeth at Denny as if prepared to file an official complaint with his mouth. Silas lifted him, too. The younger patrol employee stepped aside before Denny told him to. Denny stayed in the doorway. "Silas!" Silas stopped close enough to see the reflection of the heater flame in Denny's eyes. "You're making this unnecessarily difficult," Denny said. "No," Silas replied. "I'm making it simple." Then he walked past him into the storm. The drive down from Bitterroot Hollow was slow and rough. Snow swept across the road in low white veils, and the truck's headlights tunneled through a world shrinking by the minute. Silas drove with one hand steady on the wheel and the other occasionally reaching across to touch the blanket bundle on the passenger seat. Bracken lay half on top of Milo despite having been placed beside him. His chin rested over Milo's shoulder. His eyes did not close. "Still on duty," Silas said. The puppy's good ear twitched. Halfway down the mountain, a snowmobile whined somewhere above the road. The sound hooked into Silas's spine. His vision narrowed. The steering wheel became something else under his hands. A convoy track, a broken route, dust striking glass. Calder laughing 1 hour before the world split open. Silas eased the truck to the shoulder before the flashback could take the wheel from him. He parked, breathed, counted, dashboard, wipers, blanket, road, dog. Bracken lifted his head and stared at him. Not with understanding, not with wisdom, just presence. The pup's nose, cold and damp, nudged Silas's wrist. Silas closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them. "Yeah," he whispered, "I know." He pulled back onto the road. Dr. Maeve Larkin's clinic sat at the edge of a small town below the lodge, between a closed bait shop and a post office that looked offended by modernity. The sign over the door read, "Larkin Veterinary Care," in peeling blue letters. Warm light glowed behind frosted windows. Silas carried both puppies inside. A bell rang. From the back room came a woman's voice. "If that's another man with a limping dog who says, 'He's fine, he just walks funny,' I'm retiring immediately." Maeve Larkin appeared wearing a pale blue veterinary coat over a thick gray cardigan. She was in her 60s, sturdy, white-haired, and sharp-eyed, with reading glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. She stopped when she saw Silas's face, then the bundle in his arms. "Well," she said, all humor leaving her voice. "That's not fine." "No." "Exam table." Silas obeyed. Maeve did not ask unnecessary questions at first. That was one of the reasons Silas tolerated her. She spoke to the puppies before she spoke to him, her voice low and practical, as if they were nervous guests rather than patients. "Hello, little disasters. Let's see what Winter tried to do." Bracken objected to the exam with a growl that would have been fearsome if he had weighed more than a sack of wet laundry. Maeve glanced at him over her glasses. "Sir, I have been threatened by parrots with better legal arguments." Silas almost smiled. Almost. Maeve checked Milo's gums, temperature, breathing, joints, and spine. She moved with practiced gentleness, her hands firm enough to be trusted and soft enough not to frighten. Milo whimpered when she touched the rear leg, but he did not snap. Bracken did that for him, or tried to, bumping his nose against Maeve's sleeve and huffing like a tiny furnace. "No break that I can feel," Maeve said at last. "Compression injury, cold exposure, weak pulse, but he's still with us. He needs warmth, fluids, rest, and no fool letting him walk around because he looks better tomorrow." She gave Silas a look. "I know what rest means," he said. "Men always say that right before proving otherwise." She turned to Bracken. "This one is dehydrated, chilled, underfed, and convinced he's head of security." "He pulled me to the other one." Maeve paused. "Did he?" "Not like a trained dog, more like panic with legs." "That still counts for something." Maeve began cutting away the dirty cord around Milo's neck. It was not a proper collar, more like a strip of rough material, stained and stiff from weather. Bracken went very still. Silas noticed. The room tightened around the small sound of Maeve's scissors. Under the cord, half hidden against Milo's damp fur, was a metal tag. Maeve lifted it with 2 fingers. It was cold, dull, and rectangular, no bigger than a thumbnail. Not a pet tag shaped like a bone, not a cute nameplate from a local store. This was functional, stamped with a clean code. BWD 17M. Maeve frowned. "What?" Silas asked. She did not answer immediately. She turned the tag under the exam light, then moved to the old computer behind the counter. "I've seen tags like this on working dog intake records," she said. "Not often on pups this young." Silas stood beside the table, one hand resting lightly on Bracken's back to keep him from launching himself into the field of medicine. Bracken's fur was beginning to warm beneath his palm. Maeve typed, waited, clicked, typed again. The wind pressed against the clinic windows. On the screen, a database opened with a logo Silas did not recognize. Bitterroot Working Dog Initiative. Maeve read silently. Her mouth flattened. "What is it?" Silas said. "Private program," she replied. "Marketed as Winter Search and Rescue Support, Avalanche Response Prospects, Rural Emergency Preparedness. They've been applying for grants and community funding through partnerships." "With the lodge," Maeve glanced at him. "Among others." She typed the tag code again. A file came up. Litter ID, intake batch. Status, incomplete. Cross-reference pending. Then a line near the bottom. Case monitor, Reese Calder. The name struck the air from Silas's lungs. For a moment, the clinic light seemed too bright. The room tilted with terrible softness. He was not back in the ambush this time. Not fully. He was somewhere worse, caught between before and after. Calder. A laugh over a radio, a hand gripping the back of Silas's vest, a voice saying, "If we get out, Harrow, get a dog." Dogs don't ask dumb questions, and they don't write reports. Maeve turned from the screen. She saw his expression and did not ask the obvious question. That was another kindness. "You know the name?" she said. Silas swallowed once. "I knew her father." Maeve looked back at the monitor. The blue-white light made the lines around her eyes deeper. "If this code is right," she said, "these two didn't just wander off somebody's porch." Bracken shifted under Silas's hand, then lowered his head beside Milo's shoulder. Milo, sedated by warmth and exhaustion, gave a tiny sigh. Maeve's voice dropped. They fell out of a record someone expected nobody to check. Silas stared at the tag in her hand. Metal. Cold. Numbered. Small enough to overlook. Heavy enough to open a door he had spent years holding shut. Outside, Bitterroot darkened early behind the clinic glass. Snow drifted past the window in thin, slanted lines. The storm had not arrived in full yet, but its breath was already on the town, on the road, on the high timber above the lodge. Inside the clinic, 2 puppies slept under borrowed heat, and Silas Harrow stood very still, listening to a dead man's name return through the life of a dog. Reese Calder arrived just before dusk when the town below Bitterroot had already begun to disappear into snow. She did not come in dramatically. There was no slammed door, no heroic entrance, no storm-lit silhouette like something carved for a movie poster. The clinic bell only gave a tired little ring, and then a woman stepped inside with snow on her boots, a canvas satchel over one shoulder, and the expression of someone who had spent too many months telling the truth to people paid not to hear it. She was 34, though exhaustion had drawn sharper lines around her eyes. Her brown hair was tied low beneath a dark green knit cap, and her parka was the practical kind. Deep pockets, worn cuffs, no attempt at beauty except the beauty of something that worked. A mustard yellow waterproof notebook stuck out of one pocket. Her phone was in her hand, its case scratched, the screen already lit with photographs. Maeve Larkin looked up from the exam table. "You made good time." "I drove before the county closed the lower road." Reese stamped snow from her boots, then saw the 2 puppies. Whatever sentence she had planned vanished. Milo slept under warmed blankets, his injured legs supported with careful padding. His small face, marked by that dark line down the forehead, looked softer in sleep, as though pain had stepped outside the room for a minute. Bracken sat beside him, wrapped in a towel, one ear high and one ear tipped sideways, watching every adult with the grave suspicion of a tiny judge. Reese took 2 steps closer. Bracken growled. She stopped immediately. "Fair," she said softly. "I wouldn't trust us either." Silas stood near the far wall, arms folded, back not quite touching the cabinet behind him. He did not move when Reese looked up. He had heard her last name from Maeve less than an hour earlier, and it still sat in his chest like a cold stone. Calder. Some names did not enter a room. They opened it from the inside. Reese studied him for a moment longer than politeness allowed. Recognition came slowly, not from his face at first, but from the silence around him. Perhaps her father had described that silence. Perhaps grief had a family resemblance of its own. "You're Silas Harrow," she said. It was not a question. Silas nodded once. "I knew your father." "I know." Maeve, who had never mistaken awkwardness for privacy, suddenly found several bottles on a side counter that needed arranging. She turned away, but not so far that she could not hear everything. Maeve believed in giving people space the way a barn cat believed in affection, from a distance, with one eye open. Reese set her satchel on a chair. She did not offer Silas her hand. He was grateful for that. "My father used to talk about you," she said. Silas looked at the floor. "He shouldn't have." "He said you were the quietest man in the unit." That part was true. "He said you gave away your last protein bar in a sandstorm and then lied badly about not being hungry." Silas's jaw moved once, as if a word had tried to rise and thought better of it. Reese's voice did not soften. That made it easier to bear. "He also said you were the kind of man who listened when everybody else was busy explaining why they were right." Maeve made a small sound at the counter. "Rare breed." Silas did not look at her. For a few seconds, the clinic held 3 kinds of quiet. The professional quiet of Maeve, the guarded quiet of Reese, and the old, buried quiet of Silas Harrow, who had spent years trying not to stand in rooms with the children of men who had not come home. Then Milo whimpered in his sleep. The sound restored the present. Reese crouched slowly beside the exam table, careful not to loom over Bracken. This is the one with the tag? Maeve handed her the small metal rectangle sealed inside a plastic sleeve. BWD-17M. Found under a rough cord around his neck? Reese's face changed. Not in surprise. In confirmation, Silas noticed. You've seen it before. I've seen the series. Reese opened her notebook, flipping past pages filled with dates, initials, transport notes, and codes written in a tight hand. BWD stands for Bitterroot Working Dog. The 17 marks the intake batch. M is probably male, though they've been inconsistent with their own system, which is one of the first reasons I started watching them. Denny Holcomb had spoken in polished phrases. Reese spoke in numbers. Not coldly, never coldly. There was heat beneath every word, banked and controlled, like a fire kept alive under ash. But she did not waste emotion where evidence was needed. She pulled up photographs on her phone and turned the screen toward Silas and Maeve. Kennels in snow, dogs behind chain-link panels. A banner with clean lettering. Bitterroot Working Dog Initiative. Avalanche Readiness Partner. A man in a resort jacket smiling beside a German shepherd in a red training vest. Denny Holcomb. These were posted publicly, Reese said. Fundraising campaign, county preparedness dinner, lodge newsletter, 2 regional grant applications. They sell it as a rural emergency readiness project, raising and evaluating dogs for search support in winter conditions. It sounds noble. It photographs well. Donors like puppies, agencies like readiness, resorts like looking useful. Maeve adjusted her glasses. And the dogs? That's where the numbers start limping. Bracken, offended by some private thought, placed one paw over Milo's blanket. Reese's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time something in her expression loosened. There were 21 pups recorded across 3 recent litters, she continued. 11 remain listed in active evaluation. 4 were marked transferred to foster homes. 3 were marked unsuitable and removed from training status. 2 appear in separate sale listings under private names. 1 has no exit record at all. Silas looked at the sleeping shape beneath the blanket. Milo? Maybe. Reese tapped the plastic sleeve holding the tag. Or one of several they hoped would become a rounding error. The words landed harder than if she had shouted. Silas had seen men reduced to numbers before. Service records, casualty lines, evacuation counts. The language was always cleanest where the reality had been worst. A number could not shake. A number could not whimper beneath a branch. A number did not leave wet paw prints on a clinic floor. Reese must have seen his face because she lowered the phone. I'm not saying this because paperwork matters more than they do, she said. I'm saying paperwork is where people hide what they've done to them. Silas looked at her then, for the first time, not as Calder's daughter, not as a name from the dead returning through a computer screen. As a person with both feet planted in a kind of battle he did not understand. You've been after this place, he said. For months? Why? Reese gave a short laugh with no humor in it. Because they kept sending me reports that looked clean but smelled bad. Maeve nodded. A poetic statement from the Church of Spreadsheets. Reese almost smiled. Almost. I coordinate intake audits for Mountain Haven Rescue Network, part-time, underpaid, and apparently recreationally ignored. We help track working dog programs that accept rescue transfers or public funding. Mostly, it's boring. Microchips, foster homes, vet records, grant compliance. The kind of work that makes people's eyes glaze over until a dog goes missing. And these went missing, Silas said. Some did. Some may have been sold. Some may still be on that property. I don't know yet. She looked at Bracken. These 2 are the first living proof I've seen outside their paper trail. Bracken sneezed. Maeve said, Powerful testimony. Reese leaned back on her heels. Do they have names? No official ones, Maeve said. Silas answered, Bracken and Milo." Reese looked at him again. There was something in her face now that was not forgiveness, not warmth, but perhaps surprise that he had named them so quickly. "Bracken," she repeated, looking at the guardian pup. "Because of the fern?" Silas nodded. "And Milo?" He sounded like one. Maeve gave a small approving hum. "Scientific enough for me." Reese stood and began spreading papers across the small counter near the computer. In another kind of story, the room might have filled with sirens, confessions, and immediate justice. But real wrongs rarely unfolded on cue. They sat inside invoices, missing signatures, inconsistent dates, and polite emails written by people who knew which words made responsibility harder to prove. She showed them a printed intake sheet. Batch 17 was supposedly moved to the North Training Parcel 6 weeks ago. Here, all pups accounted for. Then, 3 weeks later, 5 are marked as foster diversion due to temperament mismatch. "Temperament mismatch?" Maeve said. "At 4 months old? That's a fancy way of saying somebody didn't like the look of them." "Exactly." Reese pointed to another page. "But the foster addresses are incomplete. One is a vacant cabin. One is a post office box. One is a property that belongs to a board member's cousin, but no animals were ever registered there." Silas listened, but part of him had drifted, not into the past this time, but into a different unease. He knew terrain. He knew weather. He knew how to cut a fallen limb without shifting weight onto a trapped leg. But this world Reese described was a blizzard made of forms and signatures. It could bury the living without leaving a footprint. "I found them on the trail," he said. "They're safe now. Maeve can report the tag." Reese stared at him. "That won't be enough." "It gets them care." "It gets these two care." Her voice sharpened, then steadied itself. She took a breath. "Look, I'm glad you found them. Truly. But if they're from Batch 17, then Bracken and Milo are not just lost pups. They're evidence that the records are false. If we don't connect where you found them to the North Parcel, the program can say they were stolen, dumped by a foster, picked up by wildlife, anything. They'll rewrite the gap." Silas hated how reasonable that sounded. He hated more that she was right. Milo shifted under the blanket, and Bracken pressed closer at once, resting his chin across the smaller pup's shoulder. His pale lightning mark stood out against drying fur. Reese saw it. Her expression changed again, quietly this time. "My father used to say dogs tell the truth with their whole bodies," she said. Silas's fingers brushed the old compass in his jacket pocket. It was an instinctive motion. He wished he had stopped it. Reese noticed. "That was his?" she asked. Silas did not answer at first. Then he took the compass out and held it in his palm. The brass was scratched, the cord frayed. The hinge had been repaired badly years ago by a man who could maintain rifles, radios, and mountain gear, but had never learned how to fix anything delicate without making it look wounded. "He gave it to me before our last rotation," Silas said. "Said I needed it because my sense of direction was great, until conversations got involved." Reese looked at the compass. For one fragile second, she was not the woman with the files. She was simply a daughter standing before an object that had outlived her father. "He said that?" she asked. "More or less." "He would." The room softened, but only at the edges. Silas closed his hand around the compass. "I'm sorry?" Reese's face tightened. It was not anger exactly. It was the reflex of someone who had heard too many versions of sorrow and never known what to do with them. "For what?" Silas had no good answer. "For surviving, for remembering, for not calling sooner. For letting years pass because guilt felt easier than facing a living person with Calder's eyes. For knowing him," he said at last, "and disappearing." That answer surprised them both. Reese looked down at the puppies. Bracken had finally lowered his head, though his eyes remained open. Milo's breathing had steadied under Maeve's care. "My father chose the job," Reese said. "So did you?" Silas flinched, almost invisibly. "I'm not saying that to be cruel," she added. "I'm saying I don't have room tonight to carry your guilt, and these dogs too." Maeve, still beside the counter, became very interested in organizing syringes. Silas nodded once. The words hurt because they were fair. Reese slipped the tag record into a folder. "What I need from you is not a confession, it's a location. You have it. I need you to show me." "No." The word came out before he had shaped it. Reese went still. Silas looked toward the dark window, where snow now moved faster beyond the glass. "Storm's coming in. Road up will be bad within an hour. All the more reason to go before it closes. Denny already warned me off that boundary. Denny doesn't own federal land. He owns enough of the approach to make trouble. Trouble is already here." Silas turned back. "You don't know that terrain in a storm." "No, but you do." There it was. Not manipulation. Not exactly. Need? That was worse. Silas had spent years building a life around being unnecessary. He fixed trails before guests saw the danger. He cleared branches after dawn. He came and went through service roads, spoke when required, and let the world believe he was a tool that could be stored in a shed when not in use. Being necessary to another person was a door he had nailed shut from the inside. Reese was standing in front of it with a folder in her hand and two half-frozen puppies behind her. Maeve broke the silence. "Milo can't go anywhere. Bracken shouldn't either, but he'll probably file an appeal." Bracken lifted his head at his name. "See?" Maeve said. "Litigious." Reese crouched near the table again, not reaching for him. "If I can document where they came out, I can file a stronger report tonight. Pictures, coordinates, comparison to the property map. I'm not asking you to confront anyone." "That's how confrontation usually starts." "Maybe." Reese looked up at him. "But leaving it alone is how they win." The words were simple. They should not have been enough. But Bracken chose that moment to move. The pup slid down from his towel nest with great effort, landed unsteadily on the clinic floor, and limped, not from injury, but exhaustion, toward Silas. Maeve made a warning sound, but Bracken ignored medical authority completely. He reached Silas's boot, placed his small chin on the leather, and exhaled. Not a command, not a miracle. Just weight. Warm, living weight. Silas looked down at him. The pup's crooked ear trembled. His eyes, no longer wild with panic, still held the stubborn duty of a creature who had stood between his brother and the world with nothing but teeth too small for the task. Something in Silas gave, not loudly enough for anyone else to hear. He had thought the puppy had only pulled him toward a creek hollow. Now, looking at Bracken against his boot, he understood the animal was pulling him somewhere harder. Back toward witness, back toward responsibility, back toward the part of himself that still knew how to answer when the helpless called. Silas bent slowly and lifted Bracken, ignoring the damp towel smell and the pup's offended grunt. He set him back beside Milo. Then he faced Reese. "We go to the spot," he said. "We do not cross the partner fence. We do not go near their buildings. We take coordinates and photos. Then we come back before the road closes." Reese nodded once. "Agreed." Maeve made a sound that suggested she did not entirely approve, but had known men, weather, and justice long enough to understand none of them waited politely. "I'll keep Milo warm," she said, "and this ridiculous sentry if you can convince him not to chew my cabinets." Bracken immediately placed one paw on Milo's blanket and stared at Silas, as if betrayal had been added to the evening's charges. "You stay," Silas told him. The pup's one upright ear twitched. Reese gathered her notebook, phone, and a small handheld GPS unit from her satchel. Silas watched the practiced economy of her movements. She was not a soldier, not a ranger, Not someone trained to move through danger with a weapon and a plan. But she had her own discipline, the discipline of refusing to let soft things vanish inside clean language. At the door, she paused and looked back at Milo. "How bad?" she asked Maeve. Maeve tucked the blanket more securely around the pup. "Bad enough that he needed to be found today. Good enough that he has a chance." Reese closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened the clinic door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of snow, pine, and the mountain road waiting above town. Silas stepped out beside her. The sky over Bitterroot was darkening fast, and the first true bands of the storm had begun to wrap around the ridges. Behind them, inside the warm clinic, Milo slept under borrowed blankets, while Bracken kept watch with all the solemn authority his small body could hold. Ahead of them lay the trail bend, the creek, the blurred boundary Denny Holcomb had tried to turn into a wall. Silas pulled his collar higher against the wind. For years he had thought staying away from people was the price of keeping peace. Now, walking beside Reese Calder into the early edge of the storm, he wondered if peace had been waiting in the one place he had refused to stand, beside someone else. The old maintenance road did not appear on guest maps. It began behind a collapsed snow fence, half a mile above town, climbed through a stand of black pine, then curled along the north shoulder of Bitter Creek, like a scar the forest had nearly healed over. In summer, Silas used it when a fallen tree blocked the public trail. In winter, only men who worked before sunrise remembered it existed. That was why he chose it. Reese followed in her own vehicle at first, headlights dimmed against the thickening snow. But after the second bend, the road narrowed into a white channel between trees, and she left her SUV tucked beneath a fir where the branches formed a rough shelter. She climbed into Silas's truck without complaint, bringing her satchel, phone, waterproof notebook, and a small GPS unit that blinked green against the dark. "You always drive roads that look like warnings?" she asked. "Only the polite ones." Reese glanced at him. It was the first thing he had said all evening that resembled humor. Silas kept his eyes on the road. The truck crawled forward, tires gripping packed snow under fresh powder. The sky had lowered until the mountain seemed to be pressing its forehead against the treetops. Snow fell thicker now, softening the edges of rock, fence, stump, and ditch. It made everything look innocent. Silas distrusted innocent snow. It hid holes. It covered tracks. It turned bad work into clean scenery. Beside him, Reese checked the coordinates Maeve had marked from Silas's description. Her face glowed faintly in the light of her phone. She was not afraid in the obvious way, but Silas noticed the small signs, her thumb tapping twice on the side of the case, her eyes lifting every few seconds toward the trees, the set of her mouth when the truck slid a little on the turn. "You don't have to like this," he said. "I don't." "Good? That's supposed to help?" Fear keeps people honest. Reese gave a short breath. "My father used to say something like that." Silas tightened his hands around the wheel, but he did not answer. The road ended near a ridge of wind-packed snow. From there, they went on foot. Silas carried rope, a headlamp, a small shovel, and a camera from the maintenance shed. Reese carried her phone sealed in a weather pouch, her notebook inside her parka, and a folder tucked flat against her chest, like a shield no one else could see. The forest changed after the ridge. The public trail behind them had been wild, but familiar. This place felt managed, then forgotten. Boundary flags hung from branches in faded strips. A temporary wire fence leaned beneath snow. Beyond the fence, hidden behind the black pines, stood the North Training Parcel. A large sign had been fixed between two posts near the entrance. Avalanche Response. Dog Training Partner Bitterroot Working Dog Initiative. The lettering was clean. The posts were not. One leaned badly, and a twist of orange extension cord ran behind it, toward a row of low wooden kennels. Reese took the first photo without speaking. The shutter sound seemed too small for the weight of what it captured. Silas stood behind her, scanning. There were no people in sight, no trucks, no lights in the small office trailer near the entrance. A few kennels lined the slope, built from plywood and chain-link panels, roofed with tarps that sagged under accumulating snow. Bowls sat outside several of them, their water frozen into dull discs. A feed bin near the fence had been left open. Snow had gathered inside. The place did not look like cruelty from a nightmare. That made it worse. It looked ordinary. Poorly run, understaffed, excused. The kind of place where a man could stand with a clipboard and say, "We're doing our best," while everything helpless around him learned to survive on less than best. Silas had seen destruction made by force. This was destruction made by neglect with a logo. Reese moved carefully, photographing kennel numbers, frozen bowls, feed labels, loose tags, the distance between the training sign and the lodge property marker. She did not touch anything unless she had to. When she did, she photographed it first, then after. "Chain of custody?" Silas asked. She looked up. "You know evidence procedure?" "I know enough to not make it worse." "Then yes." Her voice was clipped, focused. This was where she became more than Calder's daughter. Her grief did not vanish. It stepped aside and let competence drive. Silas found the first metal tag near a kennel door, half buried in dirty straw. He did not pick it up. He pointed. Reese crouched. "BWD 17F, she read. She took a photo, then another, with a small measuring marker from her satchel. Her jaw set. "That's the same intake batch?" "Female? Probably. Probably?" They can write a grant proposal in language fit for a cathedral, but their animal records look like a raccoon managed them during a thunderstorm. Silas looked at her. Reese shrugged. "Maeve is contagious." They found 3 more tags in a cracked plastic tub beside the trailer, mixed with zip ties, old vaccine stickers, and damp paper scraps. 2 were from batch 17. 1 was unreadable. Reese photographed everything, lips moving silently as she counted. Then she found the folder. It was not hidden like treasure. It lay inside a feed invoice sleeve beneath a stack of cheap training pamphlets, as though someone had meant to move it and forgotten. Its corner had absorbed moisture, curling upward. Reese opened it beneath the shelter of the trailer overhang, while Silas blocked the wind with his body. The pages were copies, not originals. Transport sheets, intake amendments, private placement notes. Several names had been blacked out with marker, but not enough. "Denver," Reese murmured. "Sun Valley, Bozeman, private buyer, private buyer, private buyer." Silas watched snow collect on her hood. "Sold?" "That's what it looks like." She flipped another page. "But here, in the grant report, the same animals are listed as still in evaluation. Winter response prospect. Avalanche readiness candidate. Community preparedness asset." She said the phrases as if they tasted bitter. Silas looked across the kennels, the sagging tarps, the frozen bowls. The words on the paper felt too clean for the place, too warm, too proud. In another life, he had known phrases like that. Operational adjustment, acceptable loss, unavoidable exposure, language built to make a hard truth sit quietly in a chair. Reese took a photo of the page, then another. Her fingers were steady, but her breathing had changed. "Numbers don't whimper," she said. Silas turned to her. She was staring at the transport list. "That's why they love numbers," she continued, softer now. 21 in, 11 active, 4 fostered, 3 unsuitable, 2 privately placed, 1 pending. Move them around long enough and nobody has to picture a puppy under a branch. The wind pushed snow beneath the overhang. Silas said nothing. There were some sentences a person should not decorate with comfort. A sound came from beyond the lower slope. Not a bark exactly. A low, rough call, thin from distance, swallowed almost at once by the wind. Reese lifted her head. Silas had already turned. At the far end of the parcel, half hidden below the grade of the hill, stood an old storage barn. Its roof had bowed under the snow, one side lower than the other. A broken gutter hung from the eave like a bent arm. The door faced away from the trail, toward the creek hollow. Bracken was not with them. He had been left at Maeve's clinic beside Milo, under protest loud enough to insult the furniture. Yet Silas felt, absurdly, the memory of the pup tugging at his pant leg. Reese heard the sound again. This time it was clearer. A dog. Older. Hoarse. Tired. "Is that coming from the barn?" she asked. Silas was already moving. "Careful," Reese said, gathering the folder and following. They crossed between two empty kennels and descended the short slope. The snow was deeper here. Wind drifted against the barn wall. Near the door, old paw marks had hardened beneath new powder, overlapping in frantic circles. Silas crouched, brushed away fresh snow, and found scratches in the lower wood. Reese took photos quickly. From inside came another low sound, not loud enough to be a warning, not weak enough to be surrender. Silas put one hand on the door. A machine roared behind them. The snowmobile came fast along the upper track, headlamp cutting through the weather. Silas's shoulders locked before the rider even stopped. A second machine followed. The first rider pulled up near the office trailer and killed the engine. Denny Holcomb removed his helmet with careful calm. Behind him, the second rider dismounted more awkwardly. He was lean, haggard, somewhere in his 40s, wearing a brown canvas work coat with straw stuck to one sleeve. A ring of keys hung from his belt and rattled when he moved. His eyes flicked toward the barn, then away. Cal Rusk, Silas guessed, the man who fed what the paperwork had not erased. Denny's gaze moved from Silas to Reese, then to the barn door. "Well," he said, "this is disappointing." Reese straightened, phone still in her gloved hand. "Denny Holcomb? You must be Ms. Calder." Denny's smile was small and coldly professional. "I wish you had called before entering a restricted operations area. I have photographs showing animal housing conditions, unsecured records, and tags matching a missing intake batch. Then you have photographs taken while trespassing on property managed under contract by a private partner." He glanced at Silas. "With the assistance of an employee who was explicitly instructed to remain outside this area." "Contractor," Silas said. Denny looked at him. "Not for much longer." Cal shifted his weight. The keys at his belt clicked softly. From inside the barn, the dog made that low, rough sound again. Cal's eyes went toward the door, only for a heartbeat. Reese saw it. Silas saw her see it. Denny kept speaking. "Any animals housed here are under the responsibility of the program operator, not the lodge. Transitional intake can look disorderly to people unfamiliar with working dog evaluation. Weather complicates operations. Funding delays complicate operations, but I assure you, there are processes." "Processes don't freeze water bowls," Reese said. Denny's smile thinned. "That's a good line, not a legal argument." "No," Reese said, "but the records might be." Silas heard another engine rev lower on the track. His skin went cold. The sound expanded inside his head, too large for the clearing. Snow became dust. The pines blurred into smoke-dark columns. The barn wall became broken concrete. The snowmobile's idle chopped and stuttered like distant fire across metal. He knew where he was. Then he did not. His right hand closed around the leash in his pocket, the spare lead he had brought out of habit after handling Bracken. Nylon pressed through his glove. A real texture, a present thing. Still, the clearing tilted. Denny was speaking, but his voice stretched thin. Reese moved, not toward Silas, not touching him, not making him another problem in the clearing. She only said, very clearly, "Silas, Montana, snow, Bracken, present." Her voice cut through the noise without fighting it. Silas stared at the ground. Snow, his boots, the black leash in his hand, the barn. Reese's voice again. "Silas, Montana." He drew breath through his nose. The world returned badly, like a radio finding signal through static. Denny had gone quiet. That was dangerous. Silas forced himself to lift his head. He did not reach for anyone. He did not raise his voice. He did not give Denny the gift of looking unstable. "We're leaving," Silas said. Reese looked at him once. She understood. They had enough for now. Not everything, but enough to file, enough to pull a thread, enough to avoid being turned into the story Denny wanted. Trespasser, unstable veteran, activist stealing from a private facility. She slid the damp folder into her satchel. Denny stepped aside with theatrical generosity. "Excellent decision." Cal did not move. The dog inside the barn made one more sound. This time, it was almost hidden beneath the wind. Reese paused beside Cal. "You heard that?" she said quietly. Cal's mouth tightened. His eyes stayed on the snow. Denny answered for him. "We have several animals in transitional holding." Reese did not look at Denny. "I asked him." Cal swallowed. The keys at his belt trembled. Then he said, barely above the wind, "Storm's coming hard." Denny turned his head slowly. Cal shut his mouth. It was not a confession, not even close. But fear had shape, and Reese had seen it. Silas walked back up the slope with her, every step controlled. His body wanted speed. Training wanted angles, cover, readiness. But the story had to remain smaller than that. A man and a woman leaving a disputed property before the storm locked the gates. Behind them, Denny spoke to Cal in a low voice. Silas could not hear the words. He did hear the keys. That faint metallic rattle followed them through the black pines like a chain being dragged over ice. By the time they reached the maintenance road, the light had nearly gone. Reese tried to send the photos from her phone. One image uploaded, then another stalled at 12%. The signal flickered, vanished, returned, vanished again. "Come on," she muttered. Silas started the truck. The radio cracked with overlapping voices from the lodge. Guest roads closing, upper pass unsafe. County plow delayed. Staff requested to remain on-site overnight. Reese tried again. "I got the tag photo through to Maeve, maybe one record page, not the barn. Send coordinates to your ranger contact." "I'm trying." At last a message delivered. Then the phone lost signal entirely. Reese stared at the screen as if willpower might shame it back to life. The first real gust hit the truck hard enough to rock it. Silas looked through the windshield toward the hidden parcel. Through the trees, a faint light moved near the office trailer. Then another. Not sweeping like searchlights. Working lights. Busy lights. Denny was not waiting for morning. Reese saw them too. "He's moving records," she said. "Maybe animals." Her face tightened. The road below town would close soon. The upper pass was already gone. Bitterroot Hollow was becoming an island of snow, timber, and bad decisions. Silas put the truck in gear. For the first time since Reese had entered Maeve's clinic, neither of them argued. The mountain did enough speaking for both of them. As they drove down through the darkening pines, snow erased their tire tracks almost as soon as they made them. Behind them, on the north parcel, the clean sign still faced the storm, promising rescue, readiness, and community safety. Beyond the sign, inside the low barn, a mother dog called once into the wind. Then the blizzard swallowed the sound. Night came down on Bitterroot like a white weight too heavy for the mountain to hold. By 6 o'clock, the windows of Silas Harrow's cabin had gone blind with snow. Wind moved through the pines in long, rising cries, not like an enemy charging, but like something older and colder circling a fire it meant to put out. The roof creaked, the stovepipe shuddered. Every few minutes, loose ice struck the tin like thrown gravel. Inside, the cabin held its small circle of warmth. Milo slept on a folded wool blanket near the stove, his injured rear leg wrapped the way Maeve had shown Silas before sending him home. The little pup's breathing had steadied, though now and then his body trembled in sleep, as if the cold still had one paw hooked in his dreams. A bowl of water sat nearby. A second bowl held softened food he had only sniffed before surrendering to exhaustion. Bracken did not sleep. He stood at the cabin door, damp fur finally dry, but still sticking out in uneven tufts, one ear high and the other tipped sideways like a flag after battle. He stared at the door, then at Silas, then back at the door. "Not happening," Silas said. Bracken whined. "No?" The pup scratched once at the wood. Silas looked up from the radio on the table. "You are 4 months old and built like a wet sock with opinions. You do not get a vote." Bracken turned his head just enough to make it clear he had filed an appeal. The radio gave only static. Silas adjusted the dial, tried the lodge channel, then the county emergency frequency. Voices came in torn pieces. Upper road closed. Plow delayed. Minor slide near the southern pass. Non-essential travel suspended until morning. He tried calling Maeve's clinic. No connection. He tried Reese. Nothing. The phone showed one bar, then none, then one again, like a candle thinking about death. Silas set it down carefully, because throwing it against the wall would not improve reception and would make him feel 13 years old. On the table beside the radio lay the scrap of paper Reese had given him before they parted below town. Graham Voss, Federal Ranger. Beneath it, a number. Reese had managed to send some of the photos before the signal failed. The tag, one transport page, coordinates near the parcel entrance, maybe enough to open a report, not enough to open the barn. Silas looked toward the ceiling. Above the main room was a narrow storage loft with one small window facing the northern ridge. He had used it in summer to watch smoke lines during dry weeks. In winter, it gave a partial view through the trees toward the north parcel, if the weather allowed mercy. Tonight, mercy was in short supply. Still, Bracken would not leave the door. The pup whined again, softer this time. Silas stood. "Fine," he muttered. "We look. Then you stop trying to become a tragedy with paws." He took the binoculars from a hook near the stairs and climbed to the loft. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, making the ladder tremble beneath his boots. At the window, frost had gathered along the edges in white feathers. He wiped a circle clear with his sleeve. At first, there was nothing but snow. Then he saw light, a faint movement beyond the black pines. Silas raised the binoculars. The storm blurred everything, but not enough. Near the north parcel, small beams moved in hard, deliberate sweeps. Not guest lights, not emergency beacons. Work lights. One vehicle stood by the office trailer. A second shape, lower and boxier, looked like a utility sled or small trailer. Someone was moving boxes. Silas adjusted the focus, jaw tightening. 2 figures crossed in front of the trailer, heads down against the wind. One carried what looked like a stack of flatboards or signs. Another dragged a bin toward the vehicle. The big training sign was no longer standing straight. One post had been cut loose or pulled down. The clean white face of it turned sideways into the snow. Denny was clearing the story before morning could read it. Silas shifted the binoculars toward the lower slope. The old barn was barely visible through the gusts. Its roof had sagged deeper than it had that afternoon. Snow piled along the weak side, pressing down in a thick white hump. The building looked less like a structure now and more like an animal trying to kneel. Bracken barked downstairs, one sharp sound. Silas lowered the binoculars. The cabin seemed suddenly too warm, too small, too safe. He descended the ladder and found Bracken still at the door, body rigid, nose lifted toward the seam where cold air slipped in. Milo had woken and raised his head weakly. His soft brown eyes moved from Bracken to Silas, confused and trusting in a way that made the room harder to stand inside. "No," Silas said again, but this time the word had lost its spine. He crossed to the radio, keyed the mic. "Harrow to Bitterroot Maintenance. Anyone copy?" Static. He tried the county channel. "Harrow to County Dispatch. Emergency relay if received." Static, then a broken voice too faint to understand. He tried the satellite phone stored in the cabinet above the sink. It was old, temperamental, and usually more useful as a blunt object than a communication device. The screen blinked, searched, found nothing, searched again. For a moment, it caught a signal. Silas dialed the number Reese had written for Graham Voss. The call connected for 2 seconds. A man's voice came through, low and rough, half buried under static. "Voss? This is Silas Harrow, North Parcel. Lights moving, barn roof." The line cracked. "Say again?" "Barn roof failing. Possible dog inside. Road conditions." The signal vanished. Silas stared at the dead screen. Bracken scratched the door again. Outside, the mountain went on, erasing the world. At Maeve Larkin's clinic below town, Reese Calder stood near the back counter with her phone raised toward a window as if offering it to some miserable little god of reception. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, come on." The screen showed one message delivered to Graham Voss, another still waiting. The image of the barn had not gone through. The most important one, of course. Technology, Reese thought, had a sense of cruelty refined by committees. Maeve moved behind her, packing a medical bag with the brisk annoyance of a woman who had hoped to spend the evening insulting bad television instead of climbing into a blizzard. She added warming packs, bandages, fluids, gloves, a scanner, and 3 towels. "You sure you want to go up?" Reese asked. Maeve snapped the bag shut. "No, I want to be in bed with tea and a dog that isn't actively trying to become evidence, but wanting is for people with better weather." Headlights swept across the clinic window. A ranger truck pulled in, heavy tires grinding over snow. Graham Voss stepped inside a minute later, bringing the storm with him. He was broad, gray-mustached, and built like a man who had spent 30 years arguing with terrain and usually winning. Snow crusted the shoulders of his green federal jacket. A radio hung near his collar, hissing quietly. "I got part of Harrow's call," Graham said. "North Parcel, barn roof, possible animal inside." Then it dropped. Reese's stomach tightened. "He's at his cabin?" "Last signal placed him there, or near it." Graham looked at Maeve's bag. "You coming?" Maeve lifted her chin. "Try stopping me, and I'll make your annual physical unpleasant." Graham nodded once, accepting this as a valid operational warning. Reese grabbed her satchel. The road up to Bitterroot Hollow had not closed so much as transformed into a thing with moods. Graham drove slowly, both hands steady on the wheel, the ranger truck's lights carving tunnels through snow that collapsed behind them. Maeve sat in back, bracing one boot against the floor, muttering about men, mountains, and the bad decision-making habits of both. Reese watched the dark slope ahead and tried not to picture the barn roof folding into itself. "Denny will say this is interference," she said. Graham's eyes stayed on the road. "Denny says many things." "He knows the boundary lines?" "He knows where they're unclear. That's different." The truck climbed. Signal died completely. Back in the cabin, Silas put Milo in a deeper nest of blankets near the stove. He set the water within reach, added another log to the fire, and checked that the stove door latched. Milo watched him. "You stay," Silas said quietly. "That's your job." Milo's tail moved once beneath the blanket. Bracken pressed himself against Silas's boot, as if afraid the man might leave without him. Silas looked down. "You should stay, too." Bracken sneezed. "That is not an argument." The pup stared toward the door. Silas knew what every survival rule said. In a whiteout, alone, at night, with roads closing and communication unreliable. You did not go deeper into timber unless a life depended on it. That was the trouble. One might, maybe more than one. He had buried enough men beneath the phrase, just 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes to reach the ridge. 10 more minutes to wait for a signal. 10 more minutes before pulling back. The world loved to hide disaster inside small extensions of time, but waiting could be a decision too, and sometimes it was the worst one. Silas took a page from the small notebook beside the stove and wrote in block letters, "North Parcel, old barn below training sign, Bracken with me, Milo by stove." 1908 hours. He added Reese's name, Maeve's clinic number, Graham's number, then set the note under the compass on the table so it would not blow away when the door opened. For a second, his fingers rested on the compass. Calder's compass? The brass was cold. "I'm not doing this because I want to be brave," he said to the empty cabin. The empty cabin, being honest, did not answer. He dressed the way fear taught him. Base layer, olive combat shirt, heavy navy snow jacket, harness, rope across his chest, headlamp, knife, folding shovel, emergency blanket, fire starter, flares, first aid kit, spare radio, extra gloves. He checked everything twice, then a third time, not because he doubted the gear, but because ritual gave his hands something to do besides shake. Bracken stood by the door through all of it. When Silas clipped a short lead to the pup's rough temporary collar, Bracken did not resist. For once, he looked almost solemn enough to match his own opinion of himself. "You stay close," Silas said. "No hero work." Bracken wagged his tail once. "Terrible listener," Silas muttered, and opened the door. The storm entered like it had been waiting for an invitation. Cold struck his face so hard his eyes watered. Snow spun in the beam of his headlamp, thick as ash, bright as shattered bone. The first 10 yards from the cabin were familiar. The next 10 became uncertain. After that, the world narrowed to rope, light, dog, breath. Bracken moved low, nose working, then lifting, then working again. He did not run. The depth of the snow prevented that. He bounded, sank, scrambled, and looked back often, as though deeply concerned about the poor quality of human pause. Silas followed the tree line toward the old maintenance cut. A branch cracked somewhere upslope. His body dropped before thought finished forming. Knee in snow, one hand out, breath gone. For 3 seconds the sound became something else. Not branch, not storm. A sharp split through hot air. The roof of another place coming apart. Men shouting in the dust. His glove closed around the rope at his chest. Nylon. Wet. Real. He forced air into his lungs. "Light," he said. The headlamp beam shook across the snow. Snow, rope, dog, tree. Bracken turned back. The pup pushed through the drift until his small body pressed against Silas's knee. He barked once, not loud enough to challenge the storm, but enough to occupy it for a heartbeat. Silas put one gloved hand briefly on the pup's back. Warm, here, now. "Yeah," he breathed. "I'm coming." They went on. The storm did not attack them. Attack would have been simpler. It surrounded, it confused, it removed distance, then direction, then confidence. It made every tree resemble the last tree, and every hollow look like the mouth of a larger hollow. Silas moved by memory, compass, and the slope beneath his boots. More than once, Bracken corrected course, not like a trained search dog, but like a creature following the only scent in the world that mattered to him. Mother? By the time they reached the edge of the north parcel, the training sign was half buried and turned sideways, its promise of rescue facing the ground. One of the temporary kennels had blown open. Empty. Snow had drifted into the feed bin and softened the labels on the sacks. Silas did not stop. The barn lay below the slope, darker than the storm around it. Snow had sealed the main door almost to the latch. The roof sagged worse than it had through the binoculars. One beam near the corner bowed inward, creaking softly each time the wind leaned on the structure. From inside came a sound, low, hoarse, fading. Bracken lunged toward the door, whining, paws scrabbling at the packed snow. Silas caught him by the harness. "Easy." The pup twisted, desperate now, every small muscle aimed at the space beyond the wood. "I know." Silas drove the shovel into the drift. Snow came away in heavy blocks. The wind threw half of it back. He dug again. His shoulders burned. His breath clouded the headlamp beam. The barn groaned above him, a tired giant considering whether to kneel or fall. Inside, the mother dog called once more. Weaker. Silas dug faster. Behind the curtain of the blizzard, far down the buried road, headlights climbed through the trees. Reese Calder leaned forward in Graham Voss's passenger seat, one hand braced on the dash, eyes searching the white chaos ahead. Maeve's medical bag thumped against the floor in back. Graham drove by memory, boundary maps, and the stubborn patience of a man who knew the mountain punished panic first. They did not know Silas was already at the barn. They did not know Bracken had led him there. They only knew the last message had mentioned a roof, a dog, and a place where Denny Holcomb had worked very hard to keep people from looking. In Bitterroot, the storm could hide many things, but not forever. At the barn door, Silas cleared the last packed layer from the lower seam and wedged his gloved fingers into the gap. Bracken pressed beside him, trembling from cold and urgency. "Hold on," Silas whispered, though he did not know whether he was speaking to the dog inside, the pup beside him, the people climbing the mountain, or the part of himself still trying to believe the world could be reached in time. Then he pulled. The barn door did not open so much as surrender by inches. Silas pulled until the old wood groaned against the snow packed around it. Wind forced itself through the widening gap, hurling powder into his face. Bracken shoved beside his boot, whining with a sound too urgent to be called fear and too broken to be called hope. "Wait," Silas said. Bracken did not wait. The gap widened just enough, and the puppy squeezed through before Silas could catch him. His small body vanished into the dark barn like a spark swallowed by a cave. "Bracken!" The only answer was a sharp, desperate bark from inside. Silas pushed his shoulder against the door, forcing it another few inches. The wood scraped over packed snow. Something inside shifted. Above him, the roof gave a tired, wooden sigh. Not good. He angled his headlamp through the opening and ducked inside. The barn smelled of wet straw, cold timber, old feed, and fear. Snow had blown through cracks in the walls and gathered in pale ridges across the floor. Training equipment leaned in one corner, plastic cones, torn canvas pads, a broken sled harness, all coated in dust and frost. A few empty crates sat stacked near the back, their labels curling at the edges. Then he saw her. The mother dog lay against the far wall, body curved around two small puppies, tucked close to her belly. She was a German shepherd, or close enough to carry the old noble shape of the breed, but hunger and winter had carved her down to angles. Her coat was black and deep brown, damp along the belly and neck, with patches of gold dimmed by cold. Her ears stood upright, though one had a small notch near the edge. Her eyes, when the light found them, were dark amber, tired, sharp, royal in defeat. She lifted her head and growled. Low, not theatrical, not wild. A warning from a mother who had almost nothing left but the right to place her body between danger and her young. Bracken ran straight to her. The growl broke. The puppy pressed himself against her neck, shivering, licking her muzzle, climbing clumsily over her foreleg as if he could not decide whether to become small again or stand guard beside her. The mother dog closed her eyes for half a second. She gave one rough, breathless sound and touched her nose to his shoulder. There was no grand reunion, no bright music, only a few muffled whines, a few urgent licks, the tremble of bodies that had been separated too long in a place where warmth had become a rumor. Silas stood very still. He had no right to name her. Not yet. Still, the name came to him. Sable, dark as the winter woods, proud as a queen who had lost her kingdom, but not her crown. "It's all right," he said softly, though it was not all right, and every living thing in the room knew it. Sable's eyes fixed on him. Bracken turned, stepped in front of her, and growled at Silas as if the last 10 hours of shared hardship had been merely a preliminary interview. Silas almost laughed, but the barn groaned again above them. The sound killed the moment. He swept his headlamp up. The central roof beam had bowed under the weight of snow. One support post leaned at a bad angle, its base dark with rot, where damp had eaten into the wood over years. The front door was half blocked. The rear door, if there was one, lay behind a stack of warped boards and collapsed feed bins. He needed to move fast, but not too fast. Sable watched him as he eased his pack from his shoulder. He took out a thermal blanket and spread it on the driest patch of floor he could find. The 2 puppies near her belly were smaller than Bracken, black and gold bundles with ears still soft and uncertain. They whimpered when he came close. Sable's growl returned. Silas stopped, lowered his gaze slightly, and turned his body sideways to appear less threatening. He had handled armed men, frightened men, angry men. A frightened mother dog was not the same thing, but respect still had rules. "I'm not taking them from you," he said. "I'm taking you with them." Sable did not understand the words, but tone mattered, distance mattered, Bracken mattered most. The puppy nudged one of the little ones, then looked back at Silas. His crooked ear shook from cold and urgency. Silas moved again. This time, Sable let him slide the blanket closer. She trembled when he reached for the first pup, but Bracken pressed against her chest, and she held still. Silas wrapped the first puppy, then the second, tucking them together in the silver warmth. They were light, too light, but alive. Their small mouths opened in silent complaint when the cold air touched them, then settled as the blanket took them in. "Good," Silas whispered. "Good girl." Sable tried to stand. Her front legs pushed, her rear legs shook. She made it halfway before sinking back down. Silas's stomach tightened. She was not going to walk out on her own. He crossed to the back of the barn, shoving aside a broken crate with his boot. Behind the stacked boards was a rear service door, smaller than the front, swollen in its frame, but not buried as badly. If he could clear a path, rig a drag with the blanket and board, he might get Sable through without forcing her to stand. Might. The roof gave another long complaint. Silas worked by headlamp and touch. He cleared boards, dragged a cracked sheet of plywood free, tied rope around one end, and tested the weight. Bracken followed every movement, occasionally pawing at the wrapped puppies as if checking inventory. Sable kept her amber eyes on Silas, her breathing shallow but steady. "You don't like this plan," Silas said to her. Sable blinked. "Neither do I." He wedged the plywood near her side and tried to make a ramp of sorts, using a fallen plank to bridge a dip in the floor. The boards beneath him flexed. He froze. The barn listened. Nothing happened. He shifted his weight more carefully and reached for a loose beam, partly blocking the rear door. It was not large, but it had jammed against the swollen frame. He needed a few more inches of space. He set his shoulder under it, lifted, and pulled. The beam moved. So did the floor. The sound was small at first, a crack beneath his left boot. Then the rotten boards gave way. Silas dropped, not far, 4 feet, maybe 5, into the shallow crawl space beneath the barn. But he landed badly, shoulder striking a crosspiece, one leg twisting in rope and debris. The plywood slid after him, pinning his arm against the side. A crate followed and struck near his ribs, knocking the breath from him. His headlamp snapped sideways. Light spun across the underside of the floor, cutting the dark into crooked pieces. For a moment there was no pain, only pressure. Then pain arrived, clear and hot, under the shoulder and along his side. Silas tried to push up. The beam over his arm did not move. He took one breath. Not enough. Another. Better. Above him, Bracken barked. "Stay," Silas tried to say. It came out rough and thin. Bracken barked again, circling the edge of the broken floor. His paws scraped at the boards. Sable growled weakly, not at Silas now, but at the broken world that had opened beneath him. Silas tried to shift his trapped arm. The rope tangled around his boot tightened. He could not get leverage. The barn roof groaned overhead. The sound entered him through bone. And suddenly the darkness beneath the floor was not a crawl space. It was a shelter half collapsed in another country. The air was hot, packed with grit. Someone was calling over the radio. Calder's voice came and went, broken by static. Silas heard himself giving an order. Left rote, move left, move left. And then the world answered with ruin. He knew it was memory. Knowing did not stop it. His mouth filled with the taste of old dust. The headlamp beam trembled across the boards, and in that shaking light he saw not straw and snow, but smoke, not rope, but cable, not a barn, but the place where his life had split into before and after. Bracken's bark cut through once, then again, far away, close by. "Stay," Silas whispered, though he no longer knew whether he meant the dog, the memory, or himself. Bracken did not stay. The puppy ran to Sable, then to the broken floor, then to the door. He barked until his voice cracked. No human came. The barn answered only with wind and old wood. So Bracken made the only choice his small body understood. He ran. He seized the loose end of the short lead Silas had tied to a post near the entrance, chewed, pulled, twisted, and backed up with all the ferocious seriousness of a creature far too young for duty. The knot slipped enough for the lead to loosen. Bracken wriggled free, shoved himself through the front gap in the door, and disappeared into the white storm. He did not know rescue plans. He did not know coordinates, federal boundaries, evidence chains, or old guilt. He knew the den was failing. He knew his mother was inside. He knew the large man who had carried Milo was now below the floor and not rising. And somewhere in the wind, faint but real, were the smells of the woman from the clinic road, the bitter old doctor, the ranger truck, oil wool, snow, human urgency. So he ran toward the lights. The world outside was almost gone. Bracken plunged into snow that reached his chest, bounded out, vanished in a drift, burst free again with his ears flattened and his pale lightning mark hidden beneath frost. The wind shoved him sideways. He tumbled once, rolled, sneezed snow from his nose, and staggered back to his feet. Behind him, the barn became only a darker shape in the dark. Ahead, through the trees, light moved. Two beams, yellow-white, climbing slowly along the maintenance road. Bracken ran toward them with the full, unreasonable faith of the very young and the very desperate. In Graham Voss's ranger truck, Reese leaned forward suddenly. "Stop!" Graham's foot eased onto the brake. "What?" There. A small shape had appeared in the headlights. For one wild second, it looked like a clump of brush blown across the road. Then it stood, legs spread, snow crusted over its back, one ear high, one ear tipped sideways. Bracken. He barked once. The sound was nearly lost under the wind. Reese opened the door before Graham finished saying, "Careful!" The cold hit her like a wall. "Bracken!" The puppy turned and ran a few steps back toward the trees, then stopped and looked over his shoulder. Maeve leaned forward from the back seat. "That ridiculous little officer is trying to tell us something." Graham stared through the windshield. Or he's panicked. Reese had already seen the short frayed lead dragging from Bracken's collar. "He was with Silas," she said. "Follow him." Graham did not argue again. Bracken did not lead in a straight line. He led like a puppy in a blizzard, badly, bravely, with several unnecessary detours and one full-body crash into a snowbank that made Maeve swear at the weather on his behalf. But every time the truck lights caught him, he turned back toward the same slope. At the point where the road grew too narrow, Graham stopped the truck. "On foot," he said. They moved fast, but not recklessly. Graham carried a pry bar and shovel. Reese had her headlamp and satchel. Maeve carried the medical bag against her chest, like a holy relic full of towels and stubbornness. Bracken bounded ahead, then back, then ahead again, his bark now hoarse. The barn emerged from the snow. Reese saw the sagging roof and felt her stomach drop. "Silas!" she shouted. No answer, only Bracken clawing at the door gap. Graham widened the opening with the pry bar, while Reese dropped to her knees and crawled in first, headlamp sweeping the barn. She saw Sable against the far wall, eyes bright, body curled around the silver-wrapped puppies. The mother dog growled. Maeve entered behind Reese and immediately lowered her voice. "Oh, you poor magnificent girl. Yes, yes, I know. Humans are mostly disappointing, but tonight you get the better batch." Sable growled again, but less. Reese heard something below the floor. A rough breath. "Silas!" She crawled toward the broken boards. Her headlamp found him beneath the floor, one shoulder pinned, face pale under the dirt and frost, eyes open but not focused. "Silas, look at me." His gaze moved, but did not land. Graham climbed in, assessed the broken section, and began clearing weight from the edge. "He's pinned under the crosspiece. We can lift it, but slowly. Maeve, keep that dog calm." "I am attempting diplomacy with a queen," Maeve snapped softly. "Do your lifting." Reese lowered herself flat against the floor, reaching through a gap in the boards. Her fingers found Silas's hand. Cold, tense, alive. "Silas," she said, clear and steady. "Montana, barn, snow. Bracken found us. You're still here." His fingers twitched. The words seemed to move through the dark by inches. "Bracken?" he whispered. "He found us," Reese said. "That little fool ran straight into the lights." A breath shook out of Silas. His eyes tried to focus. Then his face changed, not with pain exactly, but with the terrible recognition of someone caught between two places. "Calder?" he whispered. Reese held his hand tighter. "No, Reese." "I'm sorry." The words came thin, torn out of somewhere deep. "He didn't come back. I should have—" "No." Her voice did not break, though something inside it came close. "Silas, listen to me. I don't know what my father would say to every part of that day. I don't know, and I won't pretend I do." Graham shifted the beam above him. Wood creaked. Silas grimaced, but stayed conscious. Reese kept her eyes on him. "But I know this. He would hate that you used his death to bury yourself alive." The barn seemed to hold still around the words. They did not forgive everything. They did not heal him. They did not rewrite the past into something softer. But they crossed the distance between them like a first board laid over deep water. Silas's eyes finally found hers. "I'm here," he whispered. "Yes," Reese said. "Stay here." Graham braced the pry bar. "On 3. Reese, pull when I give you space." Maeve, kneeling near Sable, had wrapped the two smaller puppies tighter and was murmuring insults at the universe in a voice tender enough to make them sound like blessings. Bracken stood beside her, shaking violently, yet still trying to position himself between everyone and everyone else. "Little man," Maeve told him, "you have officially exceeded your job description." Graham counted. 1, 2, 3. The beam lifted a few inches. Reese pulled Silas's trapped arm free. He bit back a sound, turned his shoulder, and Graham reached down to haul him up under the good arm. It was awkward, slow, and entirely without grace. Heroism, Reese thought, usually looked much worse up close. At last Silas rolled onto the barn floor, breathing hard. No one celebrated. The roof groaned again, louder this time. Graham looked up. "We move now." Maeve had already made a sling from one thermal blanket and a tarp scrap for Sable. The mother dog resisted at first, then tried to rise and failed. Bracken pressed himself to her muzzle, whining, and Sable allowed Maeve and Graham to slide the support beneath her. Silas, despite Reese's glare, pushed himself upright. "You are not carrying anything," Maeve said. "I can pull." "You can breathe and obey. Start with those." But when Graham needed another hand on the rope, Silas gave it, jaw tight, movements careful. Together they dragged Sable toward the widened door, while Reese carried the wrapped puppies against her chest. Bracken followed so close, he stepped on Silas's boot twice. The roof cracked behind them. Not a collapse yet. A warning? They slipped through the front gap into the full force of the storm. Graham and Silas guided Sable onto a rescue sled from the truck. Maeve tucked warming packs near the puppies, then checked Silas with one sharp glance and apparently decided he was too stubborn to fall over until ordered. They had moved 20 yards from the barn when part of the roof gave way. It folded inward with a heavy, muffled crash, sending a burst of powder through the broken walls. No fire, no spectacle, just old wood losing its argument with snow. Everyone stopped. For one heartbeat, all sound was wind. Then Sable lifted her head from the sled and looked back at the barn. Bracken stood in the headlights, covered in snow, legs trembling, chest heaving. He looked far too small for what he had done. His crooked ear had gone nearly flat. His other ear still stood up, stubborn as a flag over a ruined castle. Reese crouched and opened one arm. This time, Bracken came to her. Not fully, not softly. He leaned in only for a second, as if affection were a tactical risk. But it was enough. Silas watched from beside the sled, one hand pressed to his sore shoulder, his breath rough in the cold. The storm moved around them, white and ancient, still trying to erase the road, the barn, the tracks, the truth. It had failed to erase one small puppy running toward the light. Graham turned toward the truck. "We go, now." No one argued. They loaded Sable and the puppies with careful urgency. Maeve climbed in beside them, already checking gums, temperature, breathing. Reese helped Silas into the passenger side, ignoring his attempt to pretend he did not need help. Bracken jumped in last, missed the step, was lifted by Graham with one large hand under his belly, and landed in Reese's lap with an offended grunt. "Knight of the realm," Maeve said from the back, defeated by a truck step. For the first time that night, Reese laughed. It was small, shaky, almost lost beneath the wind. But Silas heard it. As Graham turned the truck back toward the buried road, the headlights swept once across the broken barn. Snow was already softening its edges, trying to make ruin look peaceful. Inside the truck, Sable breathed. The puppies stirred. Bracken pressed his wet head against Reese's sleeve, then watched Silas through half-closed eyes. Silas looked back at him. "You foolish little soldier," he whispered. Bracken's tail thumped once. Outside, the blizzard kept raging. Inside, for the first time all night, every living thing they had come for was still alive. After the blizzard, Bitterroot Hollow no longer looked like a postcard. The snow did not glitter cleanly beneath a blue mountain sky. It sagged from roofs in heavy, gray-white layers. It slumped from fence rails, exposed dirty wheel ruts, and revealed the half-buried shapes people had hoped winter would keep hidden a little longer. The world after a storm was less beautiful than honest. It pulled the sheet back. At the north parcel, the training sign lay face down in the snow. Avalanche response, dog training partner. Only the word rescue remained visible, half covered by slush and pine needles. Graham Voss stood beside it with his hands on his hips, his green federal jacket zipped to the throat, his gray mustache rimmed with frost. He did not look triumphant. Men who had spent their lives in the backcountry knew better than to celebrate too early. The mountain could show a man one truth in the morning and bury another by noon. Reese Calder moved through the parcel with her notebook in hand, taking photographs of what the thaw had begun to reveal. Empty kennels, frozen bowls, a cracked plastic tub containing loose metal tags, a feed invoice dampened by snow, tire tracks leading toward the service road. The remains of the old barn stood lower than before, one side of the roof folded inward like a tired shoulder. Silas Harrow watched from near Graham's truck, one arm held close to his side. Maeve had forbidden him to lift anything heavier than a coffee mug, and had defined coffee mug with such suspicion that Silas had not tested the boundary. His shoulder ached, his ribs protested whenever he breathed too deeply. Nothing was broken, Maeve had said, though she delivered this news with the disappointment of a woman denied a better lecture. Sable and the pups were at the clinic. That fact was the only reason Silas was standing instead of pacing a trench through the snow. Milo remained on warm bedding, his injured leg improving by slow, stubborn degrees. Bracken had fallen asleep beside him after trying to climb into every medical bag in the building. Sable had accepted food, water, and a dry blanket, though Maeve reported that she still watched every human as if weighing whether their souls met basic kennel standards. "She has excellent judgment," Maeve had said. Silas believed her. A county deputy had come and gone. A federal animal welfare inspector had arrived before noon, then called 2 more offices. The words became official after that. Temporary hold. Funding review. Program suspension pending investigation. Chain of custody. Transport records. Emergency animal placement. Silas listened to them all and understood only the important part. No one was sending Sable back. Denny Holcomb stood outside the office trailer in his clean black lodge jacket, though it did not look quite as clean today. Slush had reached the cuffs of his pants. His hair had lost its polished shape beneath a knit cap. The smile was gone, replaced by a controlled irritation that made him look smaller, not crueler. "This is being mishandled," Denny said to the inspector. "The lodge contracted with a partner organization. We are not the daily operator of the animal facility. There were weather complications, miscommunications, operational errors." Reese looked up from her notebook. "Operational errors," she repeated. Denny did not look at her. On the tailgate of Graham's truck lay a row of sealed evidence bags. Tags, wet papers, copied transport sheets, photographs printed from Reese's phone, and Maeve's veterinary report. Each one was small. Together they were heavier than the storm. Cal Rusk stood 10 feet from the trailer, hat in both hands. He looked worse in daylight, thinner, older. The stubble on his jaw had gone uneven, and his brown canvas coat still smelled faintly of damp straw. The ring of kennel keys no longer hung from his belt. Graham had taken it that morning, not roughly, but firmly enough that Cal's hand had trembled when he gave it over. Cal was not a hero. Silas could see that clearly. The man had spent too long standing beside wrong things and calling them complicated. He had fed dogs in half-frozen bowls, locked doors he knew should have been opened, and told himself the same lie that built most quiet disasters. Someone else is responsible. But after the barn roof folded inward and Sable was carried out trembling beneath emergency blankets, something in Cal had cracked too. Not nobly, not cleanly. Enough. He gave his statement in Graham's truck because the wind still made paper difficult. Reese sat in the back seat with her notebook open. Maeve leaned against the door, arms crossed, her expression sharp enough to cut boot leather. Silas stood outside, not invited, not excluded, close enough to hear through the open window. Cal spoke with his eyes on his hands. Denny said the good candidates had to be moved before the weather shut us in. The healthy ones? The pretty ones? His mouth twisted around that word. The ones buyers were already asking about. Reese did not interrupt. He told me to pull the private placement sheets and the old tags. Said the audit people wouldn't understand temporary reclassification. Said if the lodge lost the grant, people would lose jobs. Cal swallowed. He said the mother dog had already been marked as failed breeding stock, not worth moving in the storm. Maeve's face changed, not louder, colder. And you believed him? Cal closed his eyes. I told myself it wasn't my call. Maeve looked toward the broken barn. That sentence, she said, is the coldest kennel human beings ever built. No one answered. Even Denny outside the truck seemed to hear it. The investigation did not end that day. Life rarely shaped justice as neatly as stories wished it would. There was no single speech, no villain dragged away beneath a convenient shaft of sunlight, no instant repair of everything neglect had touched. Instead, there were calls, forms, photographs, statements, veterinary records, land surveys, funding reviews, and people in offices asking why certain numbers had never matched. Bitterroot Working Dog Initiative had its funding suspended. Its cooperation with the lodge was halted pending review. Denny was removed from active management while the lodge board tried to sound surprised in language that had clearly been drafted by attorneys. Cal's statement opened new questions about private buyers, false foster transfers, and dogs moved under labels no living creature would have chosen for itself. Denny kept saying he had been trying to save the lodge. Silas believed that in the narrowest way. Denny probably had been trying to save it, save its winter season, save its grant money, save its image. Save the carefully polished dream sold to guests who wanted mountain hardship with hot cider waiting in the lobby. But there were prices no business had the right to pass down to the smallest bodies in the room. That was the thing Denny never seemed able to understand. Or perhaps he understood and simply considered it unfortunate accounting. The dogs were placed under temporary custody through Mountain Haven Rescue Network, with Maeve supervising medical care and Reese handling the tangled knot of records. Sable, Bracken, Milo, and the two smaller pups became official before they became anyone's family. They had case numbers, intake forms, veterinary charts, photographs, and temporary legal status. Silas hated every page. He hated the forms with their empty boxes, the checklists, the inspection requirements, the questions about heating systems, fencing, emergency plans, food storage, daily routines, and whether he understood the responsibilities of foster care. "Do I look like a man who misunderstands responsibility?" he asked Maeve after the third page. Maeve peered over her glasses. "You look like a man who believes glaring at paperwork might cause it to surrender? Has it worked before?" "No, but I admire your faith." He signed. Then he fixed the cabin. Not because anyone ordered him, though several people strongly suggested things in ways that sounded suspiciously like orders. He repaired the weak section of porch rail. He reinforced the back fence. He moved old tools from the floor of the shed. He bought proper dog beds, then watched Bracken ignore them in favor of sleeping across Silas's boots. He raised Milo's feeding station a few inches because Maeve said it would help him while his legs strengthened. He installed a second latch on the door, not to keep the dogs in exactly, but because Sable had the calm intelligence of a queen and the eyes of someone studying political escape routes. When Maeve came to inspect the cabin for emergency foster approval, she walked through with a clipboard and the solemn authority of a church elder judging a casserole contest. "Hearth screen?" she asked. Silas pointed. "Medicine secured?" He opened a high cabinet. "Food storage?" He showed her the sealed bins. "Sleeping areas?" He gestured toward 3 new dog beds near the stove. At that exact moment, Bracken dragged a towel out of the laundry basket, circled twice, and lay down on it with great satisfaction. Maeve wrote something on the form. "What?" Silas asked. "Resident has demonstrated that dogs will ignore all purchased comforts and choose laundry. Environment suitable." Milo, who was still supposed to avoid overexertion, thumped his tail from a blanket near the stove. His right rear leg remained weak, but he had begun using it in small, careful steps. Each one looked like an agreement with the future. Sable watched the inspection from near the door. She had gained a little weight. Her coat, brushed and dried and fed back toward health, showed its true depth. Black along the back, warm brown at the throat, gold at the edges of her face. The notch in her right ear made her look not damaged, but marked by some ancient ceremony of survival. She did not come to Silas when called, she came when she chose. Silas respected that. Reese stayed in Bitterroot for several weeks. She rented a room above the post office and turned the small table by the window into a battlefield of folders, maps, phone chargers, coffee cups, and sticky notes. She filed statements, corrected dates, called agencies, argued with a man from the lodge board who kept saying legacy partnership until Maeve threatened to mail him photographs of frozen water bowls every morning before breakfast. Reese and Silas did not become easy with each other. That would have been too simple, and neither of them trusted simple things. They drank bad coffee in the clinic break room. They disagreed over wording in his statement because Silas wrote facts the way he cut timber, short, blunt, and missing several pieces someone else might trip over. Reese made him add times, weather conditions, direct quotes, and descriptions of what he saw. He accused her of interrogating commas. She told him his sentences had the emotional availability of fence posts. Maeve enjoyed those exchanges more than she should have. Sometimes Calder's name entered the room. Not often. When it did, it changed the air. One afternoon, Reese found Silas outside the clinic, sitting on the low concrete step while Bracken inspected a pine cone as if it had forged documents. She held 2 paper cups of coffee and handed one to him. "My father really did say the protein bar thing," she said. Silas looked at the cup. "He talked too much." "He did." Silas almost smiled. Reese sat beside him, leaving a careful space between them. "He also said you were the only man he knew who could make silence sound judgmental." "That sounds like him." "He admired you." Silas's fingers tightened around the cup. Reese did not rush to comfort him. She had learned, perhaps from dogs, that trust did not grow faster because someone tugged on it. "I used to be angry that you never came around," she said. "I know." "No, you don't. Not all of it." She looked out toward the road, where snowmelt ran in dirty lines along the curb. "After he died, people came with stories. Some were kind, some were rehearsed, some wanted to feel useful. Then everyone went back to their lives. I kept waiting for the quiet one he talked about." Silas closed his eyes. "I couldn't?" "I know that now," she said. "I didn't then." Bracken dropped the pine cone at Silas's boot, apparently satisfied that it posed no threat to democracy. Silas opened his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. This time the words did not come from the deep well of old guilt. They came smaller. More human, less like a man asking to be punished, more like one finally willing to stand in the doorway of what he had avoided. Reese nodded. Not forgiveness wrapped in a ribbon, but something. Weeks became months. The case moved forward in the slow, grinding way of human systems. Ownership claims tied to the working dog program collapsed under the weight of false records, improper transfers, and documented neglect. The 2 smaller pups, after medical clearance, went to an older couple outside town named Martin and Joelle Pike, who had a fenced yard, warm floors, and the kind of patience that made even nervous dogs breathe easier. Joelle cried when Sable sniffed her hand through the clinic gate. Martin pretended not to cry and failed badly enough that Maeve offered him a tissue with unnecessary theatrical mercy. "A suitable home," Maeve declared later. though I still maintain humans should be interviewed by dogs before adoption is finalized." "They were," Reese said. Sable stared at Martin until he confessed to owning 3 recliners. "Good. Full disclosure matters." When Silas was finally approved to adopt Sable, Bracken, and Milo, he received the paperwork in an envelope Reese delivered herself. He looked at the documents for a long time. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No. You're holding it like it might explode. Paperwork has ruined plenty of lives. It can protect them too." Silas looked at Sable, who lay by the clinic door with Bracken sprawled across her forelegs and Milo asleep belly up beside her. The 3 of them looked less like rescued animals now, and more like a small, opinionated government. He signed. The cabin changed after that, not all at once. Homes did not become homes in a flash of music and sunlight. They became homes by accumulation, a leash on a hook by the door, a scratch mark near the pantry, a water bowl kicked over twice a day by a puppy who treated walking as a competitive sport. Fur on Silas's jacket. Towels over chair backs, Maeve's handwritten feeding chart taped to the cabinet. Reese's emergency contact number pinned beneath the compass. The place still had the same walls, the same tin roof, the same view of the western ridge. But it no longer felt like a bunker pretending to be a cabin. Sable slept near the door, not because she feared it anymore, but because queens preferred to choose the threshold. Bracken still blocked paths at random, especially when Silas carried firewood, apparently convinced that every log required moral screening. Milo learned to walk with a slight hitch in cold weather, but his eyes brightened by the week. He developed the habit of falling asleep with his head on Silas's boot and snoring with the boldness of a much larger animal. "You sound like a chainsaw with self-esteem," Silas told him one evening. Milo snored louder. Reese visited less often after her work took her back down valley, but she still came by with updates. Sometimes she brought coffee. Sometimes she brought forms. Silas preferred coffee, and she knew it, which did not stop her from bringing forms. Their silences changed. They no longer stood between them like a locked room. They sat beside them like a lake beginning to thaw, still dangerous in places, still cold, but no longer pretending there was no water underneath. Near the end of winter, the wind rose again after midnight. It struck the cabin walls with enough force to wake Silas from a shallow sleep. His eyes opened in darkness. His heart was already moving too fast, trained by years of nights when noise meant movement and movement meant survival. For 1 second, he did not know where he was. Then he heard Sable breathing near the door, slow, steady, present. Bracken's head rested across his shin like a small sandbag of loyalty. Milo was curled near his elbow, one paw twitching in a dream that seemed to involve ambitious running. The stove had burned low, but the room still held warmth. Snow tapped against the window, no longer a warning drum, just weather asking to be noticed. Silas did not sit up. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not lose the room. He placed one hand on Bracken's back and felt the small rise and fall beneath his palm. Outside, the Bitterroot Mountains remained what they had always been, ancient, white, beautiful, and indifferent. They would keep their storms. They would test roofs, roads, men, dogs, and promises. They would bury tracks and reveal them again when the thaw came. Silas understood, lying there in the dark, that healing was not the mercy of forgetting the storm. Healing was hearing it and still knowing the name of the room. Cabin, stove, Sable, Bracken, Milo. Home. He closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, Silas Harrow was not the only one keeping watch. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes as a small paw at the door, a tired breath beside the fire, or one brave soul refusing to let another be forgotten. Silas learned that peace is not the absence of storms. It is knowing you do not have to face them alone. And perhaps in God's quiet mercy, even the smallest creatures can become guides back to the light. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who your Bracken, Milo, or Sable has been in your own life. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe and walk with us into the next one. May your home be warm, your burdens lighter, and your heart reminded that hope can still find its way through the snow.